Morning from Red Mountain. We're on day 2 of shooting. We tried to shoot on Thursday afternoon. It was a little windy out here, so came out this morning. Nice, calm, chilly morning. Just going to show you around the vineyard today. If you've ever been to our Red Mountain tasting room, you've seen our estate vineyard. It's this 12 acres back here, L-shaped, 2 phases of planting. So initial 4 acres that we planted in 2008, and another 8 or so acres that are just out of sight that we planted in 2015. We have 6 different clones of Cabernet out here, very heavily Cab focused. Plus we also have Merlot, Petit Verdot, Cab Franc, and Malbec. So we are planning on doing all sorts of wines from here, but still fairly new in our winemaking and wine lineup process. Let's get going. Out here in Block and Block 3A, Clone 6 Cabernet. This is the last of the blocks that we ended up planting in 2008. So we planted Clone 2 in Block 1, Clone 8 in Block 2, Clone 6 here. This is the what we refer to as the winemaker's clone. So really hard to manage out in the vineyard. Yields really low, has a hard time with fruit set, but once we bring it into the winery, it just makes amazing wine. Part of this goes into our estate Cabernet, so it's since 2012 always been a blend of clones 2 and 6. If we look a little closer at the grapevine, you can notice that these are actually pretty well developed, have pretty thick trunks since these vines are now around 12 years old. What the vineyard crew just came through and did some pruning. So it's kind of a balancing act. They leave 2 buds on every shoot, trying to control the vigor of the vine. So what we're trying to do is allow enough growth so we have a pretty good fruit set, and then we can always go back and thin that at other times of the year, but we don't want the vine to just grow out of control and then just have a whole bunch of fruit here, and it just makes for not very concentrated, less interesting wines. We're here on our vineyard pad, our big circle logo, right in the middle of our 2015 planting. Got some Cabernet to my right, Petit Verdot and Malbec to my left. When I do vineyard tours, this is always a good time to look back up at Red Mountain and the ridgeline. So you can actually see in part of the mountain where those floodwaters would have risen to during those ancient floods of Lake Missoula in northern Idaho and Montana. So the top of Red Mountain actually used to be an island every 50 years or so, and those floodwaters would break. What that caused was a back eddy effect on the whole back end of Red Mountain, where the water was swirling around and mixing up those soil types on top of all the basalt that had been laid there before. Then after all that was done, the soil that you see on top is mostly wind-blown lush that would have blown back in over those soils over thousands of years. Super fine grained, sandy, chalky. So what all the soil here tends to do is it drains really well. So everything is drip irrigated. Our vineyard managers out here are able to really fine tune how much water gets to the vine. So they make them struggle, make those berry sizes smaller, which in turn makes better wine for us here out on Red Mountain. Out here in our block of Merlot, this is the very end of our estate vineyard, again planted in 2015. This is interesting. We have some of these high tensile wire out here. During this time of year, they're kind of useless, but when the canopy starts to develop, we'll actually use these to manipulate the canopy to expose fruit, to increase the amount of sunlight that they're getting. And so we can do a bunch of plants all at once using these instead of having to go individually and do all that. This is a good time too to look back up at our tasting room. You can see that very gentle southwestern facing slope that we have here that is, the main hillside of Red Mountain. Acts like a big solar panel, so we do receive the most sunlight and heat of any growing region in Washington year after year. Helps develop those ripe fruit flavors and tannins that are in most Red Mountain wines. Back here is interesting too. Just some 10 yards away from the edge of our estate vineyard is that old vine block of Blackwood Canyon Cab that we first took in 2014. This stuff right here makes amazing wine for vines that are much older than what we have planted, but just gives us some hope and a peek into the future of what the potential of our estate vineyard as these vines mature and as they continue to make more interesting and awesome wines. All right, Griffey and I are standing out in block 7 here at the estate vineyard. He loves playing with these trimmings from winter pruning. So this is clone 2 Cabernet. To my left is block 8, clone 169 Cabernet. When we were going through and tasting vineyard samples of all the 2015 plantings, these were the 2 blocks that really stood out to us. Part of us as winemakers wants to figure out why that is. A lot of times we don't really know. We kind of just have to plant and make the wine and see what happens. It's interesting though, the camera is pointed pretty much true north, so this is probably the steepest slope that we have out here in the state vineyard, and it's a southern slope, similar to some of our favorite Cabernet blocks at Quintessence Vineyard, which are clone 169 and 191. It's also a good time to see this really sandy soil that we have out here. Like I was talking about, that's the wind-blown loess. Super fine grained, gets everywhere when you're driving out here. But yeah, this is part of the magic of Red Mountain. Walking up in block 8, clone 169 Cabernet. Behind me is a pretty classic piece of Red Mountain scenery. Bunch of wild sagebrush growing. There's a lot of that out here wherever there aren't grapevines, or that sheepgrass that gives Red Mountain that red color in the spring. It's also a good view of our drip irrigation setup. Once again, this is how we really control how much water is getting to our vines. This time of year there's a lot of leftover moisture in the soil, and it's not too hot, so we don't need to irrigate these too much. As long as your dog doesn't rip up your irrigation system. This is also a good example of some of these big boulders or erratics that were either brought in by those ancient floods or by glaciers. There's actually a lot of vineyards in eastern Washington where they actually had to plant around these giant boulders because they were just too heavy to lift out. Also, we have a hay-wheat hybrid planted in between our vines. Some of its purpose is to add nutrients to the soil, but a lot of it is just to cut down on erosion. So some of these rocks will actually start to appear over time as more soil is lifted and blown away, and it almost looks like they're rising out of the ground. This is the part of the vineyard tour where I take you back up on the patio and do your tasting. Hopefully you're at home watching this tasting along. And hopefully later on this summer you can come out and visit us and we can do this thing for real. Just wanted to say thank you. If there's anything you'd like to see for future videos, if you have any questions or comments about the vineyard tour, please let us know. And cheers. Thank you guys.